thank you everyone for joining us today for our September Artist Conversation program. Each year, the Artist Date exhibition is a time capsule that highlights the themes and techniques that are on the minds of Pennsylvania artists. And this year, several artists addressed the COVID-19 pandemic. And today we are going to hear from Sandy Kessler Kaminsky, Becky Mcdonough, and Mary Culbertson Stark about how they represented the events of the preceding year. And we are going to begin with Sandy Kessler Kaminsky and her work, Fetching the Canary. And hi, Sandy.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well, how are you? And Sandy
well.
Frequently works on community and grant funding projects in the Pittsburgh area. And Sandy, the title of this painting is Fetching the Canary. Would you mind telling us the meaning behind it?
Well, it took me a while to decide exactly how to say, getting this canary. So it's taking the canary out of the coal mine, because here in Western Pennsylvania, or actually in Pennsylvania, and we're really in Pittsburgh, we're close to West Virginia, we have a lot of coal mining and they're being shut down everywhere. And we have to find new ways of our lives. And the person in the painting is actually my oldest daughter. And she's quite the environmental activist. So having her carry the canary out of the coal mine was appropriate. And the idea is that that's the last thing you're taking out. All the people are out, everything's out, everything's now becoming safe, better to breathe. She's coming out with the canary.
And why did you decide to paint her with the mask?
Well, she was that's what we wore and wear, actually. And I like to have it on because I feel like environmentally, humans have really pushed the earth about as far as we could. And that's why we're getting COVID. That's why we've really exploited our resources and gone to places we shouldn't be. And that's where I think this pandemic came from. We need to take better care of our environment.
And did the pandemic change your approach to painting and how you relate to your community?
I think it's deepened how I relate to the community. I had a residency that was supposed to happen during the pandemic, and it was put off to this summer, and it has a lot more portraiture in it. How we relate to one another, how we affect one another is becoming really evident. We have like a strong individualism streak here in the United States, but I think we still need to be aware that we connect with others. Our behavior affects others in our community.
Thank you so
much. I have a series of portraits and this is one, and it's really about how we're interconnected, how we perceive each other, how we are a part of something larger.
Thank you so much. I'm going to introduce our second work, and this is Particulate Protection, a reliquary for the N95 mask. And this is an artist, Becky Mcdonough, who heads up the Fine Arts Metal Department at Millersville University. And Becky, could you tell us about this work?
Sure. So most of my work is somehow inspired by reliquaries, which are elaborate containers for precious contents. They usually would house bones of a saint or things associated with them. But for me, I come up with other things that I find precious to put in them. So for my subject on this one, it was the mask, and that's what's the white portion, the central part of this. And I always think about things we're thankful for, so everyday precious objects, and by putting them into this kind of contents or container, we can place more importance of them or kind of elevate their importance. And so things that I were thinking about were, it's like, well, what's precious? Our lungs and breathing. And right now, these masks were really hard to find. And so that came to the forefront of, it's like, you know what? I'm going to make a piece about this. And of course, I happened to have one. So it was already there and set. And then I thought about, after I start, with what I think I want to create around, like, well, what form do I want it to take? And, what techniques do I want to bring into it? So form-wise, the reliquary idea brought me into thinking about the catacomb saints. And I have to hold up this book here. So The Heavenly Body is this book that I've always, been drawn to, has these different skeletal remains in them that the artisans have, encrusted with jewels and gold and silver. And it's like, oh, I've always wanted to do that. And they have these, versions of the skulls. And I'm like, well, the mask is kind of like the skull, and I'm going to go with that and deck it out. And so I've got the filigree going on with the pearls and everything. And it's not gold behind it, but and then too, it's like, well, it was quarantine time and I'm at home, wondering what to do. And I always thought, well, I'm going to learn to crochet. And I thought that was a great time to do it. I really do wish I had someone that could have shown me in person, because, YouTube only gets certain angles sometimes. But so I, of course, ordered this book, and it has, I wanted to do some borders, and it had hundreds of patterns in here. So it kept me busy for a long time trying to learn to crochet and come up with the different border that I wanted to crochet out of metal to put onto the piece. So those are things that I was thinking about as I approach this piece.
And I didn't, because yours is 3-dimensional, I did include a view of the back to try to give an idea of what was going on behind the front of it and the back, the gold back part. Could you kind of explain a little bit about how it's constructed?
Right. So it's funny because when I look at it, I see that mask right away, but I have kind of covered it with everything. So I made a border out of some faux suede to put over it, and the filigree pieces are then pinned through to hold it to it. And I put a cheesecloth across the mask itself to kind of give it a protective cover, because that's, mostly I'm looking to this historical versions of how they were treating those bones, and they were wrapping it in something of the sort. And it's like, oh, I'm going to do this to my new contemporary relic. And then it's like, from there, how am I going, how do you display it? So I'm always thinking of display of these objects. So the brass portion kind of has this being like a picture frame that would hold it up so it can hook onto it for display.
And is this part of a larger series? And if so, what is the theme? So
it is. I don't always do that, but this time it's like, okay, here we go. Let's just jump in and do it. So besides the mask, then I went on to toilet paper, because, that was pretty important at the time. And other things I was looking at that, were important already, it was there, but it came highly evident in society at this time, the hand sanitizer. So I did the mask, the toilet paper, the hand sanitizer, and, not that toilet paper isn't always important to people, but it were things that people were thinking about more at this time.
And your work often explores the ancient concept of a reliquary, and why celebrate objects related to the pandemic?
That's funny, because I definitely did. I picked these objects because of it. But if you look at, my previous work, it's like I'm always kind of focusing on this. So the mask wasn't a far stretch for me to do. It's like it was different reasons, thinking about COVID, but I've previously done things for hearing protection. So, earplugs, thinking about protecting yourself, whether that's in the studio or in life, other places. So that kind of aligned, and toilet paper too. It's like, well, I had, I've recently done a piece about Kleenex. So toilet paper is not that far away from Kleenex. And it becomes, something you're really thankful for when you need it. So it's still up there on my level of thankfulness, whether it was COVID or not. The one that was kind of more of the outlier is the hand sanitizer, because that wasn't something for me personally that I utilized much until the pandemic came. And then it's like, wow, it's like I've got a bottle everywhere, you're squirting it here, there. And so that one was something new for me that did just come into play with these thoughts. But it still could be something in general you're thankful for if you're thinking of killing germs and staying healthy.
Part of our universal experience that we've all been through. And thank you, Becky. I think we're going to introduce Mary's work. These slides over here. And Mary Culbertson Stark has been an artist and educator for 35 years. And this work is called Our Lady of the Pandemic. And Mary, would you mind telling us how you developed the surface of the painting?
Sure. About 5 years or so ago, I was working and actually doing some drywalling. And I was fascinated with the surface of the drywall mud. So I thought to myself, this is such a fascinating feel to it with the calcium carbonate and the talcum, very smooth. And I've always been someone who begins my work with drawing. So I thought to myself, I need a sturdy surface. I'm going to start on canvas, but I'm going to coat the canvas with the drywall mud. And it left a very beautiful glistening surface that worked really well with the graphite. Graphite has kind of a shiny surface to it, and the mica and the gypsum and the calcium carbonate in the drywall mud really work together to create a very sensual surface on which to draw. And most of my work begins with a drawing. And the other component of this is I like to embody my images into the surfaces. So this allowed me the opportunity to build up a surface that for this particular piece, I wanted it to have the look of an artifact, as though it were unearthed many years from now to describe and state what the pandemic of 2020 was. So when you look closely at the work of art, there are many different layers. The first layer, the back layer, is a flowered wallpaper that I took from a photograph of my maternal grandmother's apartment many years ago. And I built that as the beginning surface and then began to draw in the image. I also was working with the idea of daily visits to the grocery store or out in public, and I was witnessing a lot of different emotions through the eyes of the people that I passed by. And I thought to myself, I need to do some kind of an image that's going to reflect that. And of course, in the evenings, with the evening news, all of the healthcare workers with their exhaustion, with the masks hanging from their ear, I just thought that I wanted to do this collective portrait.
And was there a significance to the way that you removed the layers?
Yes, yeah, there is a significance to it. It was a kind of an adding and subtracting. If one thinks about what transpired during 2020, all of the push and pull of information about the pandemic, some coming out that we felt that there was going to be some breakthroughs, and then there were backups, and then there were more possible breakthroughs, and the tension. So I was trying to create a dynamic tension within the surface. And also, one of the influences of this work of art had to do with a history of Renaissance art. When I first started studying art, Renaissance was one of the topics I was given as a docent at the Columbia Museum of Art. So I spent a lot of time studying altarpieces, and I was enthralled with the idea that each altarpiece was a story, a narrative, and that many families had their own altarpieces in the home, some of which had their own personal items painted into the altarpiece. And I thought I wanted to do something this past year that would include objects that represented for me and maybe in a collective spirit the emotions of the pandemic.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about the specific imagery that's in here? I was thinking about the jewelry and the metal and some of the text.
Sure, absolutely. Across the top is Our Lady of the Pandemic, and with the light coming out from behind her. And of course, that's a nod to Renaissance Madonna. Also on her shoulder is a bird. It's a pin that a friend of mine had given to me. Both of us had lost our sisters, and we share a bond about having that loss between us. And I'd like to think of the idea of that bird as being the spirits of our sisters in flight, and also as a protective measure. There's also strings of pearls, and they represent pearls of wisdom. Some are complete and shiny, and some still are more of a ghost. So that lends itself to the idea of building wisdom. There's a medal down at the bottom that is a medal that I retrieved when one of my grandmothers passed on. It was my grandfather's medal. So the idea of all of these different ornaments have to do with the things that we carry with us in our lives that give us strength, because this piece is really about perseverance. It's about the courage to carry on. It's a collective narrative. So it's not just about me per se, but it's just about what I felt and saw moving through that year. And I started out with the visage of the Statue of Liberty, using that as the beginning guide for the face, because I was thinking about what America really was going through in 2020, not just the pandemic, but we had all of the ups and downs of election and all of the social turmoil. So collectively, it's a piece that represents perseverance and making it. I look in the mirror, I'm here, I've had all of these things happen to me in my lifetime, and I'm celebrating in so many ways, but I'm also moving through with caution.
Thank you very much, Mary. I think we are at a great place to move on to our question and answer. And we do have a question here for all of our artists. Did you have trouble finding materials during the pandemic?
Yeah, if you guys, before we do that, if you want to stop sharing your screen,
Oh, yeah,
Amy,
sorry.
and then if we want to bring all our artists on, remember guys, use that Q&A button at the bottom. So now, Amy, if you want to direct that question to people.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Sherry, of getting me on track. Did any of you had trouble finding materials for your?
No, I have, I've done a lot of public works, and I have a stockpile of paint. So it was actually kind of fun to go in and dive in there. I paint on, I had to move out of my studio, however, so I have a small space. So I did all my paintings on, I guess you call it parachute cloth. I do a maroflage technique sometimes when I'm working with communities. And so I use that material to paint on. And that way, when I felt like the painting was really good, I could mount it on the panel. But it's easier to store rolled up pieces of fabric than giant panels.
And I did not have any trouble finding materials either. It was fine, and I just built with what I had.
Yeah, for me, I had that N95 mask, realized that was an issue. But otherwise, luckily, it's like I already had my tools and equipment and everything more where I noticed that was if you were trying to supply yourself at that time, it was really hard to find a little ball peen hammer.
Excellent. And Becky, we have a comment here for you. It says, beautifully done, Becky. You achieved a look of antiquity.
Thank you.
And we have another question. Were you all able to connect to the artist community during the pandemic? And if so, what did that look like?
I want to talk to that a little bit because there were, a lot of things were popping up as far as places where you could join chats and, have that sense of community, but still, for me, we lost in-person conferences that I really find very beneficial and inspirational. And, we have some replacements, but I'm looking forward to we can get together in person again and be safe.
I enjoyed actually not being around any community, just really nesting with my kids and my husband. It was really a nice break. I really enjoyed it. As far as artists, I talked to my friends and, so I wouldn't say it was they canceled all the figure drawing, obviously. Only now are they starting to get back. No, not a lot of community, but a lot of nice quiet time. It's okay. It's all right.
And I'm pretty much the same as Sandy was as well. Yeah, I was in contact with some of my artist friends and so forth, but I kind of hunkered down and really contemplated creating these pieces because I really wanted them to be a statement for the year 2020.
Did you work from studios or from your home, or what did your setup look like over the past year?
My studio is in my home. Okay. I have a third floor that is dedicated to working, and then when I need some input from other artists, I take it to another studio or to an art center and we dialogue about the work.
Yeah, and I'm
at the beginning.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, right, I have a studio at home, but then also too, with my endeavor to learn to crochet, I could take that with me a lot of places. So it was nice to do something where you didn't need a torch or, other larger equipment.
Well, I had a studio at the beginning of the pandemic, excuse me, but I think in like May, I moved. I just didn't know with my revenue stream if I could maintain it. And so I just moved. I'm now in the basement and like the carport breezeway for my sculpture at my home. Hopefully we'll be able to build something, but because right now rental prices are through the roof. And I'm waiting for materials costs to go down. So I'm in the basement.
I think I can speak for all artists is that when you're inspired, you can create just about anywhere, whether me too, in my garage or wherever. When it hits, you got to do it.
You do what's necessary.
Right, Sandy.
We have a question here from Mary. Mary, how long did it take for you to complete your work?
I actually worked on it for a couple of months because I wanted to embody a sense of history with it, of what was transpiring. So I started it in March and really worked on it throughout the summer, changing it. I was trained as a printmaker, so we like to think of things in reverse. So I was erasing and subtracting and then adding until I felt as though I built the piece that made the statement I wanted. So a couple of months.
And we get that question a lot from our visitors, so I'm going to pass it on to Sandy and Becky as well. How long did it take you to create your work?
I'm classically, so I can paint, and I've also worked as a production artist, so I can paint pretty accurately, pretty quickly. For me, it's not about how fast I can paint it. So I came up with a concept. I got some photo reference. I worked it up a couple different ways and then had to let it sit for about a week or two and then come back and work on it some more. So it's not like I'm not a factory. I can't do a widget painting sort of thing, but so I work on it, excuse me, and then I come back to it and then finish it. So you would say it takes you about a month to do a painting at least, sometimes 2, depending on like, try this, you try that, how it comes about.
Yeah, same here as far as it's like it's always going to take me a while and like so that exists. So with all the practice, and I don't really know either. So making the little the suede trim on it, it took me a little while to make patterns, and so a lot of times it's fine.
Just a reminder, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to put them in the question and answer box. And we have a question from our live audience.
Other artists develop a new way for learning.
Were you able to hear that?
No.
Did you develop any new ways to be creative during the pandemic? Any new techniques?
Pick which one of us goes first. Amy.
You can go first.
You go first, yeah.
I did not invent any new techniques, but I was actually delighted that I could just have the time to really expand the process. I already had been wanting to do portraiture for a long time, and could do it in fits and starts. And it was really wonderful that I could just put like 6 months into it and not have to be pulled in 15 different directions.
Right, and I think for me, it's like, yes, I learned some new techniques, but also I incorporated some into my pieces that I hadn't really used in a finished piece. I'll have sample piece and things I try and experiment with, but it was nice to finally get it into a piece that I consider, a larger showpiece.
And I agree with that. That's kind of what happened with me too. I tried different techniques on smaller canvases to see what it was, how much of a removal of the drywall and how much more I wanted to add onto it, what kind of paint, what kind of mediums I wanted to mix with it, and found some really interesting ways to get a luminescence to the surface. So yeah, it was great to be able to experiment.
Gift of time.
Yes.
And we do have a few more questions here. Did 2020 change the way you relate to your students and or audiences?
I now relate to I have so many more students on Zoom. Like I had like 2 before the pandemic, and now the vast majority are on Zoom. And I'm working with another nonprofit to teach with our partner with a local library to teach kids on Zoom. Normally I would have been in person at the library. So a lot more Zoom calls. So I tutor. I'm not like a professional, so I tutor individually. The other ladies are professionals.
Right, and I had to, doing medals online it's like, oh my gosh, what? So when we first went fully online, that was a huge learning curve. But then from then on, I was able to have cohorts, so hybrid classes. So I did see students once a week. And mostly the changing then was that, how can we shorten this down? They have less studio time. What information can you get them in a different format so that then they can work when they're hands-on in the studio?
I'm sorry, Becky. I thought you were finished. I'm sorry. I'm a retired teacher, so blessings to you who are still teaching. It had to be quite a challenge and continue to be a challenge on Zoom and have time, in person and so on. As far as reaching audiences, I've always been a storyteller. So my audiences now are people I encounter that tell me stories, give me inspiration, and hopefully I can go back in the studio and recreate that story in such a way that it speaks to a larger volume of people. So I'm hoping that the work reaches a larger audience now.
Okay, and I'm going to do a last call on questions. We do have one more here. Do you think that the pandemic changed the way you work in a permanent way? Or are you planning to kind of, once things are better, return to the way that you operated previously?
I do not think it didn't change that at all for me. I've been an artist my whole life, and as I said, a storyteller, and I'm just going to continue doing that regardless of how things transpire down the line. I feel grateful that to have had a life of being an artist, that, you know, there's not an age limit on it, so we can continue forever doing our work, and I'm awfully grateful for that.
Right, and I think for how much I value the metals community and, you know, working that way in a group, metalsmiths are also very solo people sometimes too. So as far as being able to hide away in my studio and work for hours at a time, it is something that I'll continue to do, even though I'll welcome getting out and the exchange with other artists too and students.
It hasn't changed my process. I still like to work in the studio. If anything, it's made me a little less community oriented and more studio and more studio focused, I would say.
Okay, well, I think we are at the perfect time to wrap up our program. Thank you, Sandy, Becky, and Mary, so much for taking the time to share your work with us. And
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
And Art of the State will be open to the public from September 26th until January 2nd. And this is the first of 4 artist conversations that will be focused on artists that are featured in the Art of the State exhibition. And the rest of the programs will also run on the first Friday of every month for the rest of the year. And please join us for future programming. Thank you everyone for participating, and have a safe and happy Labor Day weekend.
Great. Everybody have a wonderful holiday weekend, and we look forward to seeing everybody here at the museum for Art of the State, and also back for Learn at Lunchtime in the future.